We are creating a visual documentary on the rise and fall of the underworld gangsters in Sheffield from the 19th century up until modern day, showing how different areas have changed over time, with gangs from the past and present operating in and around Sheffield.
Using the research we have gathered from various sources, we found that this began in the 1920s, just after the First World War, with much of the population being crammed into unsanitary slums where poverty, mass unemployment and endemic gambling had for decades fostered criminality and criminal gangs.
The 1920s became the most notorious period in Sheffield's criminal history, earning it the name Little Chicago, as rival factions battled to control the Sky Edge tossing ring, which was positioned on a patch of wasteland on a hilltop, behind what are now the Park Hill Flats.
Throughout 1923 to 1925, controlling the proceedings and obviously turning a healthy profit were the underworld gangsters George Mooney and the Mooney Gang, who had a rivalry with another rising local gang, Park Brigade. This caused crime in the area to rise, with conflicts between each gang fighting for control of Sheffield and police having little effect and being unable to contest with the gangs.
From 1925 to 1928, a special duty squad was set up to help eliminate crime and bring the gangs down. A man called Percy Sillitoe led this. In 1928, the special squad was disbanded, the gangs broken, and their services were no longer needed.
After relating to how gangs started and ended in areas such as Park Hill Flats, we then researched into the regeneration of these areas in and around Sheffield to show the gangs had been put to an end and the city was being regenerated. This began in the 1950s and 1960s, with some clearance in Sheffield continuing. Many new council houses were built in estates like Gleadus Valley. Council flats were built at Park Hill and Hyde Park, and in the 1950s and 60s, many Asian and West Indian immigrants came to Sheffield.
After the regeneration in the 1960s to the 1990s, gangs weren't particularly active during this time. However, they were forming and petty crimes were committed in the city by newly formed gangs that were on the rise.
This continued to the early 2000s, where postcode gangs had started to form. In particular, S3 and S11 raised back from the regeneration of Park Hill and Hyde Park Flats. This led to numerous murders and gang-related crimes in and around the city.
A raid on a house in Sheffield, police believe, has links with the city's gangs. They're looking for drugs, knives and guns. A confidential report seen by the BBC says there is a misconception that it is difficult to obtain a gun. The report says young people in Sheffield do have access to guns and some are prepared to use them.
This is still continuing in Sheffield, with crimes situated in the same areas from the 1920s gang-related problems.
Guns can come kind of easy to certain people if they're all the right people. A friend will know a friend or something, or a cousin of a friend or something. It's not an odd thing to get hold of, really, if you're in the circle of people that I used to associate with.
And this is the result: 10 lives lost to gang violence. There have been 2 fatal stabbings, but 8 times out of 10 the murder weapon was a gun.
Thank you for listening to our VR.